Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to some of you, depending on where you're listening from. My name is Dr. Neil Parsan. Welcome to Globespan 24x7. Tonight we have a very casualized version of the program. We have three very distinguished gentlemen. Welcome to our living rooms, our basement, our various places from where we're calling from. We have a guest from Guyana. We all know him. We have a guest from Trinidad and Tobago. You'll be acquainted with him very shortly, and one of my good friends and colleagues from Jamaica. Tonight, we are here to talk about the economic and social impacts of COVID-19, the implications for the wider Caribbean, and more specifically, some of the areas that we all come from. Welcome to my basement. I'm speaking to you from Washington, D.C., and I really want this to be a very casualized dialogue between friends and family, some fairly experienced speakers who are on. Please feel free to interact with us on Facebook and other media. Please feel free to ask us all the questions you wish. We are here for about 60 to 90 minutes, depending on the extent of the dialogue. And we really want this to be an open conversation with the public from our various places, from where we are calling, and the wider Caribbean. So welcome to our living rooms, all of you. There's a very short video clip introducing our various speakers, which we'll enjoy now, and then we'll come back and hear from these distinguished gentlemen.
Ambassador Parsan held the position of Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary to the United States of America, non-resident ambassador to the United Mexican States, and permanent representative of Trinidad and Tobago to the Organization of American States for a period of over 5 years. He also held the cabinet position of Executive Secretary for Integral Development at the Organization of American States. Dr. Parsan earned his undergraduate medical degree at the University of the West Indies, Facility of Medical Sciences, where he graduated with distinction. After spending 8 years as a lecturer and tutor at the Facility of Medical Sciences, he pursued a Master of Business Administration, where he graduated with a top distinction in his class. He also holds a registered financial consultant degree, a CACM from Harvard University School of Public Health, and a World Trade Professional degree from ITM Worldwide in Sweden. Dr. Parsan was also awarded an honorary doctorate for education, culture, and humanitarian work from the Americana University, registered with Cambridge University and the Congress of Mexico.
Zachary Harding is the Group CEO of the SSL Group with responsibility for the SSL Growth Equity Limited Stocks and Securities Limited and Boost Ventures. Over the years, Zachary has developed a solid reputation in senior management and strategic marketing roles, enjoying stellar track records in positions including Chief Executive Officer, Head of Strategy, and Director of Marketing. Zachary serves on several boards and was named one of the top 50 under 50 business leaders shaping Jamaica's future by the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica and the Gleaner newspaper. Harding is a past board member of the Urban Development Corporation, Port Authority of Jamaica, National Education Trust, Jamaica Manufacturers Association, Independent Radio Company, the National Gallery, Jamaica Sport and Sterling Asset Management Limited. Harding is also a Justice of the Peace. Dr. Frank Anthony has had a passion for community service and outreach all of his life. He was born in Enmore on the east coast of Demerara in Guyana. Dr. Frank Anthony graduated with his medical degree in 1993 and began working at the Georgetown Hospital. He has held clinics for a number of years and brought relief to many. Ian John is the CEO of Massey Technology Infocom, the leading ICT company in the Caribbean. He considers himself a technological futurist with specific interests in attempting to systematically explore predictions and possibilities about the future and how they can emerge from the present to impact our peoples, communities, societies, and ultimately our way of life.
Thank you for sharing that video with us, Globespan. And ladies and gentlemen, given the lineup of distinguished guests we have on tonight, I wanted to frame this. We are here to talk about the economic and social impact of COVID-19. We all know what COVID-19 is. We all are aware of the challenge of this particular virus. It's an invisible, extremely cunning, common enemy all over the globe. and has been declared a global pandemic. Right here in the Caribbean, as at today, we have had well over 1,050 plus cases. We have had well over 20 plus deaths. Just this afternoon today, the Dominican Republic stands at 581 cases with 20 deaths. Trinidad and Tobago stands at 66 cases with 2 confirmed deaths. Jamaica stands at 26 cases with 1 death. Barbados, 24 cases. Guyana, 5 confirmed cases. There may be a challenge with the testing protocols there, and 1 confirmed death, and many, many other such examples. We have very small islands, Guadeloupe, Martinique, tremendously challenged by this. Cuba has been providing human service, supporting many countries medically. Just recently, delegation of 50 Cuban doctors land in Italy to support Lombardy with this crisis because of their advancement, seemingly in prophylactic healthcare in Cuba, and the work they have been doing with a particular protein called interferon and how it may interact with the virus to help deal with the crisis. But here in the Caribbean, this is an unprecedented, unplanned predicament we have found ourselves in. Nobody expected this. It has happened. It is challenging the core of all our governments, our spend, our budgeting. It is testing truth. It is testing competence. It is testing science, and it is testing proactivism in approaching this situation we have found ourselves in. The economic and social viability of the Caribbean is at stake. That's the reality, and all of this in an economic environment that has already been challenged. Bearing in mind, just last year, at the end of last year, the global economy projected that the global growth rate would have been around 2.9%. With COVID, that has been recalculated at under 1.5%. That has very severe implications because there was a plan. The thinking was there will be a recession at the end of 2019 into 2020 at a global level, and the projected growth rates, it was calculated, may have been able to mitigate that global recession. Now that calculation is out the window. In the Caribbean, the projected growth rate for the Caribbean region was about 3.7%. Right now, it's less than 2%. And that may be a stretch. So it has severe economic consequences for the region. I would love to hear my colleagues and my friends who are on this call share their perspectives from where they sit on how this may potentially affect us economically, socially, and the many other leads we could think of for time to come. My own feeling about this, and I have shared it, I am on these programs fairly often during the week. I am of the view that this may peak around May, June. I am of the view that this could last between 6 and 9 months. I do not know what the implications of my thought would be in terms of period of lockdown, isolation. Of course, that's up to individual governments. But when we see right north of us in the United States that they have surpassed China in terms of numbers of cases, etc., and the US, mind you, is nowhere close to the beginning of the curve as yet. So there's more to come. I hate to be I'm not being an alarmist, I'm being a pragmatist. That's the reality of the situation. And there's an old saying, when the United States sneezes, the Caribbean catches a cold. What does that mean for us? Zach, what does that mean for us? Tell us.
First of all, it's an absolute pleasure being here. Neil, great catching up with you again. Frank, Ian. I was working on my COVID beard, Ian, but I was having some challenges. So you're a couple of days ahead of me. We have to try and find, I think, a little bit of human light during this time because we are in a serious situation. I mean, we all know it, we're all talking about it, but I find that there's a tendency in the Caribbean, because of our, happy-go-lucky nature, to just kind of go ahead like, boy, everything is just going to be okay and everything is just going to be fine. But the challenge with that is that the Caribbean is not defined biologically. It's only defined geographically. So there's no science that says that the Caribbean is going to react any differently to a biological war, right? And I want to make this super clear, and I'm joining you from the perspective of not being an alarmist, but my own view is that we are in war. This is wartime. We just grew up watching black and white movies with soldiers, alighting from submarines or ships and, running onto the beaches with guns and helmets and shooting people. And that's our concept of what war looks like. We're just in a different type of war that we just didn't plan for and we didn't prepare for. So the world is at war right now. It's not necessarily obvious that we're at war country by country, but we're certainly at war with a foreign enemy, which is this COVID-19 virus, right? Everybody's being killed and dying because of it and being infected because of it. So we are at war. For the Caribbean, I think that some of the governments have done a very good job. I must say I'm very proud of my Prime Minister. It's a non-political statement, but just as a citizen observing, really demonstrated a very of leadership and calm during this time. It's not easy when you know that there's a threat and there's a tsunami approaching you to know how you're going to deal with that. There's multiple factors happening at the same time. But through his leadership, I think the cabinet has done an excellent job. They've been certainly very transparent with the information. Our Minister of Health, Dr. Christopher Tufton, who's also a good friend of mine, has maintained a very steady, calm demeanor throughout this whole thing and has really provided people with information on a timely basis. And I've been tracking also what's happening in Barbados, what's happening in Trinidad, and what's happening in Guyana. And for the most part, the leaders are trying to get information out there. The challenge with that is that because we have this mindset that we are immune and everything is going to be all right, I don't think the people in the countries have been treating it with the level of seriousness that it deserves. So we kind of sit there and we watch TV and we're like, boy, look at what's happening in Italy. Boy, that's rough over there on them, man. Boy, look at the numbers in China. All Spain now too, the numbers going up. But it's like we're sitting down there thinking that it's not going to happen to us somehow. We only have 5 confirmed cases so far, and the numbers haven't gone up. We haven't gotten any increases in the last week. Well, how would we get the increases? We don't even have the stuff to test properly, right? I know Dr. Anthony earlier on was talking about the number of test units that they had in Guyana, and it was like 30 or something like that. So how can you test and report an accurate number if you don't even have the number of test units there to be able to be testing? So what happens is there is this effect where every individual that catches it, and I'm saying, you guys know this, but I'm saying it to the rest of the viewers, every individual that catches it, it's estimated that they pass it to 2 or 3 other people, right? When you look at that, it works like this. I'm going to try and use the screen, right? So it's like, okay, a couple more people getting it, 2 people get it, 3, 9, 18, 40, 60, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, and the number just skyrockets once it gets to this point because of that tripling effect. So you very quickly go from 10,000 to 30,000 to 90,000 to 270,000 to nearly 1 million people to 2 million people.
Sure,
and
sure.
It happens in that last stage, right? It's 13 steps from patient 0 to getting to 1.4 million people, right? So let's just look at those numbers for Jamaica for a minute. We have a population of 2.8 million people, roughly. The numbers also tell us that 50% of all populations will get it. Some even say higher. That's 1.4 million people. In addition to that, the science has told us that at least roughly 2% of those people that get it die. Right? In Jamaica, that would be 28,000 deaths on top of the regular deaths that we have just from people getting sick and old age. That is more people enrolled in our national stadium. Right? We would not have enough ambulances, we would not have enough hearse, we would not have enough mortuaries, we would not have enough cold rooms, we wouldn't even have enough vehicles, much less funeral homes, funeral parlors, and burial plots to be able to bury 28,000 people in addition to the rest of the deaths if that happened within the next 3 to 4 months. So I kind of feel like we're on the beach, we're seeing the tsunami, it's like way out there. And we're saying, boy, I see the wave, it don't really look too big from here, But because of, for those that love physics, parallax and perspective, it's much bigger out there than we can see at this moment in time. And that is my fear, because the end result is we're talking about, trying to balance and preserve the economy, and it's a delicate balance. If you have 28,000 people that are dead, you're going to end up with people in the road, in the street, right? And at that point, your healthcare service can manage it, and the economy is going to be shut down anyway, because you're going to have more dead people than you can manage.
So, Zach, on that point, that's a really good segue into Ian. Ian, you have been very proactive, I know, as an employer, as a CEO in a very large company. You have been exercising a leadership role, really, when it comes to, you and I have had discussions a while back about the role of the private sector, the role of leadership, and the role of employees almost becoming leaders. I will tell you something before I put you on, Ian. I am in Washington, D.C. I travel out to that airport probably every week, every 2 weeks. And there are banners up all over the airport in D.C. that always says, thank you for your service. Why? Because war veterans are coming into the airport to come to D.C., to the monuments and so on. The new thank you for your service will be to our doctors, our nurses, our healthcare providers, our attendants, our policemen. That's the new thank you for your service. Those employees, those steadfastly the system working. What are your thoughts?
Well, thanks, Neil, and thank you for having me. I just want to make sure that everyone is hearing me clearly.
Yes.
Great, thank you, and thank you to everybody who's on tonight. As Neil said, depending on which part of the world you are this morning, as the case may be. To your point, this is extremely difficult times, and it's taking a toll psychologically, I think, on everybody at this point in time, because you're not looking at one region or one country that is dealing with a disaster. You're looking at the entire world that is now in turmoil. And I think for us here in the Caribbean, when you look at the developed countries struggling and having, and these are countries that are equipped and well prepared, and they're having a very difficult time coping with the impact of this pandemic, it can be really daunting in terms of, okay, what is likely to be the end of our Caribbean economies and our Caribbean countries, if ever the virus should take a toll on any one of the Caribbean nation, like Zach just said, that really and truly can be catastrophic. I think it comes back to leadership. And Neil, as you rightly said, we were having this conversation long before it was even a topic on the news in the Caribbean. And I was sharing with you some of the things that I had put in place very, very early on in January before Carnival was here, talking about ordering PPE for my staff who provide very, very essential services to the banking sector, the retail sector, which is now an essential business, and then communications, which is also very important in terms of, BCP and just keeping business going in this critical time. And so anyone looking at what was taking place in China, and somewhere in January, it started to make its way across Asia and then into Europe. But the thing about it is that we don't look at what is taking place on a global scale. We tend to be very local or very hyper local in terms of our views. And I think that is what would have caused many of the business leaders or even governments to be caught unaware. I think the attention was certainly brought to everybody's attention when the U.S., because we look to the U.S. In terms of leadership. And when we realized what was taking place in the U.S., then we started to panic. And we did so because we have a large chunk of our diaspora. All of the countries in the Caribbean, you have family members throughout the United States, and they would call and say, hey, you see what's going on here with the food? You see what's going on with the corona? You see what's going on in New York? And that's when people began to take notice of what was taking place. Unfortunately, it's reached a stage now where we are feeling the impact of it in every single country. And as Zach said, the economic impact as well as the social impact, we're trying to do that balance. But clearly, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to look at what has been done and what has worked. And clearly, what has worked is take a look at China, take a look at Taiwan, take a look at Singapore, and try and find out what they did in that they were able to shut down very, very quickly their borders, shut down businesses, shut down the movement of people within the country, and they took a big hit. But you're seeing where certainly they have been able to contain the virus to some extent. The problem with flattening the curve is that it's going to flatten your economy. Because as you try to flatten that curve, you're going to be smoothing and extending the pain over a very long period of time. And, you run the risk of the economy stalling. You run the risk of more business going out into receiverships. You run the risk of a lot of families going through a very, very extended period of hardship because you're trying to flatten the curve. When in truth and in fact, what we should have done as Caribbean countries were get all of our citizens who are out back into the country, put all of them in quarantine, shut the borders, and lock down the country for 21 days minimum. And once you lock the country down, 21 days, and you see your cases are beginning to rise from the persons that you have self-quarantined who return to the country, then after a period of time, you can begin to be lax and allow your country now to begin to get back to some sense of normalcy, but you still continue to keep the borders closed. That's what China did, but they did other things as well, and we don't want to talk about some of them here tonight. But Taiwan also did that. They were very, very, one of the first countries to literally cut travel from China was Taiwan. And the Chinese government was very upset. But the fact of the matter, they said, listen, this is a city. If we allow this to spread, you will not be able to help us. We will not be able to help ourselves. And so I think that's one of the first areas, and there's still opportunity for us to do that. But what we are taking in the Caribbean is we're taking a very soft approach where we're having curfews, limited curfews. We're still allowing people to move around. We're still allowing people to go out on the streets and work and go to the supermarkets. Tell everyone, get 3 weeks of groceries in your house, or the government will give you a food card to get 3 weeks of groceries, and we're going to shut it down for 3 weeks. That's simply the way that I would deal with this to get it contained.
Ian, I want to put a peg in that thought for a reason, because I want you to respond to a question after Frank takes the floor about, as a businessman, you run a very large company in Trinidad and it's pan-Caribbean. How amenable are you to shutting down a country, knowing the effects on your business as a private sector person? I know this is about economic, the balance between the economic reality, the political risk, and public health. So hold that thought. Let me jump to Frank, and I would love for you to respond to that. Guyana is living in very challenging times, very interesting times. We're in the midst of COVID-19. We know for a fact there's a case of under testing on this issue. We have very low oil prices, and Guyana just announced its first oil a few months ago. So the hope of revenue from first oil is now dampened by Saudi's decision to flood the market with oil. We have COVID, and then on top of that, we have a very unclear situation as regards election 2020. What's the best case scenario here, and what's the worst case scenario, first of all, economically, and then home in on the COVID dialogue? That's a very tough, unfair question, but let's hear you.
Thank you very much, Neil. As everybody know who has been following what is happening in Guyana, we are in a really tough situation here. First of all, from the political standpoint, we have had an election that was completed on the 2nd of March. Everybody went to the poll on the 2nd of March. But up to now, as we're speaking, we don't have the results of that elections. Now, the longer that drags out, we are going to have a more serious problem with leadership. Because one, the parliament has been dissolved. On the 14th of April, that would mean that we would have 4 months since the parliament would have been dissolved. And that would be a constitutional milestone because you're supposed to have a government formed within that 4 months. So that is going to raise a number of other constitutional issues. So that's one. Now, we are also operating because remember, we had no confidence motion that went back about a year ago. So we had a government that was supposed to take us to election last year, March, according to the Constitution. And that didn't happen. It happened 1 year later. Now, what is the implication of that? The implication is that the government's spending right now is constrained. So you can only spend 1/12 of what you had spent in the previous year. So we can only spend 1/12 of what was spent in 2019, right? And even that is under a lot of scrutiny because some people are saying that the government, now that parliament and all that has dissolved and you're waiting on the results, that the government doesn't have the power to even authorize some of these spendings. So we are in a lot of uncharted waters here. Now, the president has issued an order on COVID-19, and in that order, he has authorized the Minister of Finance, and there's a big dispute here in Guyana right now, whether persons who are holding the positions of ministers, whether they can still be called ministers now that Parliament has been dissolved, and now that you've had an election for the new government to be formed, but you still don't have the results. So you have that kind of a dilemma. But nevertheless, there is an order that was made to authorize the Minister of Finance to release funding for this effort. And to date, we are not sure how much money has been released so that the government can now combat COVID-19. So on one hand, we have a political crisis. We have, it would seem that we are having problems with money flow so that the government can't find money to respond to this pandemic. They have gone to the World Bank, asking the World Bank for $5 million. But because of the political situation in Guyana, a lot of the international agencies have not been or don't want to perpetuate the political crisis by allowing monies to flow to the country. They want it to be resolved, and somebody named the winner of the elections so that the country can normalize. Now, while all of that is happening, we know this epidemic was coming because we were seeing what was happening around the world. But here it is that we are still ill prepared. The people who took the initiative of getting some testing kits in Guyana was PAHO. Initially, they brought someone in from Washington who helped our laboratory staff to understand how to do the testing, and they brought 30 kits. Now, up to about 2 or 3 days ago, we had 30 kits. That situation has changed slightly because PAHO has gotten maybe another 600 or 700 kits to the country. But that certainly is not enough. And so when you see our numbers are showing that we have 5 persons who have been confirmed with COVID-19, the fact of the matter is that we're not sure because we are using strict WHO criteria of what is a confirmed case. And that criteria basically states that apart from having all the symptoms and so on, that you also must have a test that confirm that you are positive. So even if you have all the signs and symptoms where we suspect that you have COVID-19, unless you have this laboratory test, you are not going to be deemed as a case. And so up to a couple of days ago, we didn't have the test kits. And now that we have them, it seems that there's some rationing going on as to who can get access to them and who can't. And we cannot run a system like this. And I was happy that when Zach spoke, he was talking about how the leadership in Jamaica and how the government has taken this on, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Health, and so forth, and they're releasing timely information and accurate information to the population. That is an important thing. We still are not sure what is going on with the epidemic in Guyana. I see over the last day or two, the Minister of Health is trying to talk to the nation about maybe some of the cases, but I think a lot of people have mistrust over the information that is being released, and in some quarters people feel that it's being covered up. So these are the vibes that you're getting. And so I would say that in a lot of ways we are not prepared for an epidemic. We have a problem not just with testing kits, but a problem with personal protection equipment. And one of the things when our index case went to the National Referral Hospital, because the guys weren't wearing personal protection equipment, what we end up having to do is put quite a lot of that, the staff of the hospital into self-quarantine, which now deprives patients of having their doctors and nurses who should have been serving them. Because we didn't have personal protection equipment, we are now having that problem of having them isolated. We cannot go on like this, you know. There are lots of lessons here to be learned, and unless the government start taking radical action in terms of getting the equipment and things that we need to fight off the epidemic, the pandemic, we are going to be in serious problems.
Frank, thank you for that perspective. You know, I would share 2 thoughts with you before I jump to Zach to ask him, and Zach, perhaps you can think about it now. How can we assist as private sector, government? I believe that in this crisis, Zach said it nicely, we are at war. We are at war with an invisible enemy. And in times of war, we support our commander-in-chief, whosoever that commander-in-chief is. Because the enemy is common, the enemy is invisible, the enemy is smarter than all of us because we can't find a vaccine, as yet at least. And just to put things into perspective, the last challenge the global space had in coming up with a vaccine was for Ebola. It took over a year to find a vaccine for Ebola. Right now, the global challenge is they're trying to bring a vaccine within 12 to 18 months for corona. We know the numbers from the WHO. You support your commander-in-chief, but you made a point that I would agree with you on. I am of the view that within 6 months, we will know which governments did their best. We will know which governments were proactive in anticipating the problems before they arose. We would know who was honest, and we would know where factual information was originating from, versus inaction and half-truths. Because at this point in time, it's a matter of our KPI, our key performance indicator in today's circumstance is number of lives saved. Today, as a WHO measure, it's number of tests done, number of tests positive, number of people isolated, number of recoveries, etc. But the ultimate is number of lives saved, not the number of deaths. It's the number of lives saved. Zach, governments are enablers. They enable things to happen via policy decisions. But in any society, it's a three-legged stool. It's government, it is private sector, and it's civil society NGO-based to keep society running.
Yeah.
What can private sector do? Not just in Jamaica, but throughout. We have had some really good examples of the private sector stepping up in Trinidad.
Right.
The private sector do as a businessman. You have led many organizations. What is your take on this?
Well, I think the first thing that the private sector needs to do is protect their staff. Because there's no private sector without the staff. Right? 2.5 weeks ago, we implemented a work from home program at Stocks and Securities Limited. We'd been planning this for the last month because we've been watching the news, following everything very carefully, and saying, listen, we really need to have a proper disaster plan in place. It could be a hurricane, it could be a virus, it could be anything. For business continuity, we have to find a way to be able to continue to serve our customers if and when there is a crisis. So we had weekly meetings. We put all scenarios down on a board. We looked at the likelihood and the probability, and we went, we kind of had a scientific classroom type approach to it. And at the end of the day, we said we have to at least test what it would be like to be able to work from home. So we took a decision on we took a decision on Wednesday that we were going to implement a work from home program the following Monday. And by Friday, we gave the team 2 days to come up with a proper draft and put the necessary things in place. And on Friday, we sent out a notice 48 hours after we made this decision in a management meeting to do a work from home project. And we just did it as a pilot first to test, but we've been home now for 2 weeks, right? And it's working perfectly fine. We have 60 team members, everybody's working from home. We have who needs to be connected to the server coming in through VPN. We have the phone numbers ported to people's cell phones directly. We're using Microsoft Teams, we're using Office 365. We're using WhatsApp as a tool also because we can have different management groups in WhatsApp, but when it comes to documents and secure files, we're using Teams. And so what we did is we decided to put our staff first. So you ask the question, what can private sector do? Put your staff first. If you're sitting down and you're waiting and you're saying, well, let me see what the government decides to do. Because so far they haven't shut us down from working, so let's just keep working until I watch the news and hear the press announcement, and then they tell us to go home. Okay, well, in that two-week period, you've exposed everybody in your staff to being incubated with the virus. Because they've all gone home, they've gone back to their communities, and they can come back with it. So the first thing, in my opinion, the private sector can do is protect your staff. Do what is necessary. You don't have to wait for a government announcement to protect your staff. If I'm protecting my family, right, I have 2 daughters and a wife. Let's say I'm protecting my family. I'm not going to wait until the government to tell me what to do to ensure that my family is safe. I don't need somebody to tell me what to do to ensure that. The second thing that the private sector can do is stop looking at it like an isolated problem. So, well, some businesses will be okay, but other businesses might not be okay. Our business will be all right, but that guy down the road, our competitor, boy, sorry for him because he's not planning properly. Because when the other businesses don't do well, your business is going to end up suffering. So it has to be a one for all for one type of mentality, because this is about this is an existential crisis that we're facing. This is about how do we as a country and as a people survive this, not just as individual businesses. So greater collaboration, innovation, and also being more proactive and not just waiting on government.
Can I ask you, before I jump to Ian, I'm going to come back to you with the question on, would you support a total lockdown in Trinidad and Tobago? But before I do that, and perhaps both of you can answer this question, I have seen many good examples internationally and right here in the Caribbean of private sector stepping up to the plate. I will give you an example. Louis Vuitton, a well-known luxury brand, went into the business of manufacturing hand sanitizers. Johnson & Johnson, their core business is by no stretch of the imagination producing masks, but they went into that production line to support China. Right here in Trinidad and Tobago, a very well-known company, Angostura, changed one of their production lines to produce 25,000 bottles of sanitizers to distribute to the healthcare system. I would love to hear some practical examples. The banks, under some requests from the government, did some good work by changing their loan rates, delaying repayment of loans, etc., etc. What else can we do practically? If you give me a couple examples, I'd also love to hear some examples from Ian. Zach.
Sure. So one of the things that we think is critical that has to be fast-tracked is telemedicine, right? So if it is that you have a problem where people need to be tested, they're having symptoms, they're getting sick, they can't necessarily make it out to the hospital or to the clinic. Even if they do, they're putting everybody else at risk, right? So the dumbest thing you could do is have a sick person go to a hospital to try and figure out what exactly they have, because they're just infecting everybody else. If we had a proper telemedicine network on this call to try and see if we could collaborate on, because that's one of the things that I just mentioned. We have to be innovative and try and collaborate in the private sector. But if we could get a proper telemedicine system set up and running as quickly as possible, and it can grow and develop, at least you'd be able to provide options for people to not have to leave their homes to be able to get tested, or at least to kind of get, some medical care or guidance. If it is that a prescription needs to be done, it can be called into a pharmacy if they don't have COVID, but they just have a regular flu. So collaborating on initiatives like that. The second thing is obviously looking at moratoriums on payments, right? Because if people can't go out to work and they can't earn, then there's no way that they're going to have the money to be able to make certain payments. So everybody has to now understand that this is it's a team effort, and so how can we work with each other and provide a little bit of flexibility on payments that need to be made. The third that I would want to put on the table is food security, right? So everybody talks about well, you can't shut down the economy because people need to be able to get to work, because if they don't get to work, they're not going to have money. Okay, that's cool. But if there's no food for people to buy, you're going to have another problem. So if you're locked down and your reserves are only 2 to 3 months, right, and maybe there's some ships on the high seas, and you end up emptying the supermarket shelves, you have that as a problem. But much more importantly, if you don't have the money to go and buy food, you are creating a recipe for civil unrest. Because if I'm locked up in my house here, and me and my daughter and my wife are here and we're starving, we are going to have to go out on the road to try and find something to eat. There's not going to be an option. So the private sector could also try to collaborate just from the standpoint of food security. So how do we be creative with that? Right now, the hotel sector is shut down completely. Right? You can't, there's no hotel business at all. All the hotels are closed. Right? So every farmer and everybody who used to produce goods and sell to the hotels now has an excess of food because they have no market for it. So they're sitting down on produce that is literally going to waste. How could the private sector now collaborate either in terms of agro processing to take some of that food and be able to process it and package it in a way that could be used for regular sale, and then also what channels of distribution exist that you could now leverage the distribution networks of a Massey, of a Grace Kennedy, of a Wisynco, of a Mossens to be able to get that food to the most vulnerable. So I'll leave it at those for now.
Sure. Ian, I did throw a couple of questions to you earlier. One was, as a businessman, would you support a lockdown? I would love to hear some practical examples that you feel could be contributory to assisting the state and others to make this happen. And then I'm also looking at the Facebook, the feed, and one of our viewers, Colin, shout out to you. I know you're in New York. Colin made a good point. He said, can we be regional, intra-Caribbean, to support each other because we're in this together as a region? So, Ian, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so to your first question in terms of a shutdown, I would support it. Personally, I would support it. I would support it for the reasons of if you do have some level of spread, within the communities, and you're still having persons to go out and work in some of the what you call essential businesses, such as the supermarkets and hardware stores, and even some of the food restaurants where they're providing curbside, you're still allowing that room for the virus to spread. And the thing about this is you want to be able to contain the virus. Now, there's a lot of conversation around herd immunity, and I don't know if you want to go to herd immunity tonight, but basically there's a conversation about it's not if you're going to get the virus, it's when you're going to get the virus, right? And so the thinking is let's slow it so that it doesn't overwhelm the health sector, the health system. Let's also slow it. For instance, the UK is talking about all of the elderly or vulnerable people staying out of the way of other persons within the population for 12 weeks. And they're hoping that herd immunity would work its way through the population. And then by the time these vulnerable persons come back in, the virus would have already worked itself through a large quantity of the population. And then therefore they would be able to integrate again with society. The key thing here is that we have small countries, small nation states, Jamaica, 2 something million, Trinidad, 1.4, Barbados, 600,000. And so within a very relatively short space of time, you can actually contain and eliminate the virus. So I think the medicine here is a very sharp medicine. Take the bitter pill. It's going to be bitter for a short period of time. But for heaven's sake, don't protract it to 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 months because our economies can't take that hit. What Zach just described is a leadership, position. Having your workers work remotely, putting your people first. Our businesses are not our buildings and plant and machinery. Last time I checked, the plant and the machinery doesn't run itself. It doesn't sell. It doesn't service customers. Essentially, our business is about people. And if you understand that, then you want to protect your people. And if you can protect your people, believe it or not, you are protecting your business. And similarly, I believe that's the position that the countries need to take as well. Protect the people. So bitter pill, communicate. It's going to be tough, but it's going to be 3 weeks. And after 3 weeks, we can open up the business again, not to the external, but certainly to the country. And if we have partnerships, as you said, Neil, if Barbados is doing it, small population. If Jamaica is doing it, small population compared to some of the major cities, then what we can do is we can have that collaboration now between Caribbean countries, particularly with the food security. So a last report that I saw, I think this was last week, and they were looking at the entire Caribbean, English-speaking Caribbean net importers of food. $1.5 billion US every year we are spending on importing food. As of today, and you and I had this conversation, Neil, where major producers of wheat and flour and rice, Kazakhstan, Vietnam, they've all banned the exports of their products. Kazakhstan, as in the case of wheat, Vietnam, as in the case of rice. China has said that it's not going to export all of its rice that it normally does. It's going to retain some of that for its population at home. So just imagine what is happening right now, where we are seeing shelves across first world countries emptied. We are seeing people having to queue in first world countries. We're seeing people going to the supermarkets in first world countries, and they're being rationed. You get 2 tins of this, 1 tin of that, 1 tin of that. That's all you're allowed. So what is our position? Our Caribbean countries and our Caribbean leaders need to come together, and we need to, as Zach said, we know that there's a very robust agricultural sector that actually supplies the tourism industry in Jamaica, and that industry, there is no tourists right now. So should we be looking at building out the resilience there and increasing the capacity and providing some of the other Caribbean countries with food? Should Trinidad be looking at making energy available to the Caribbean countries in exchange for food? One of the things we found out this week, we were trying to acquire PPE on the global market. And these are all of your Tivex suits and all of the things to fight and this was private sector looking to do that in partnership with government. And when we went out on the global market, we were told by the suppliers, hey, we are not dealing with 100,000 masks or 200,000 masks. Your order has to be 12 million, 8 million. Now, that might be too much for one Caribbean country, but here's the opportunity for us as Caribbean leaders to come together and say, hey, let's go out there with one bulk purchase, and then we'll supply each other on the ground, the logistics of it. So what is coming out of COVID is really the opportunities for a different type of leadership throughout the Caribbean. And unfortunately, what we're seeing a lot of countries now facing internally, and protectionism is starting to be on the rise again. Unfortunately, it's the same countries that were talking about globalization and open boundaries and sharing. Those countries are now holding on to their resources for themselves. And the Caribbean, being a net importer of food, I mean, today I drove around in Trinidad, and we have a partial lockdown coming on stream midnight on Sunday. Every single supermarket had lines with long queues of persons, some of them not even observing social distancing, because now it's panic buying. This is likely what would happen when you don't prepare the population and you don't educate them and you don't speak to them and get them to understand that, hey, this is the plan, this is what we're going to do. So I support it. I say shut down, get 3 weeks of food, get in your house, you're not going to come out. Otherwise, what will happen is we have spread. We're going to end up in a situation like Spain and Italy. Sad to say, Zach said it earlier on. And that is going to be worse, because you're going to have economies that are going to fail. Coming back to Warren Buffett, when the tide goes out, you get to see all who's been skinny dipping. And we already seeing a lot of persons and companies and businesses are falling up, not just around the world, but right in the Caribbean. We've had many people who've been retrenched, right? Because companies don't have the liquidity to ride this out. They are over leveraged with debt. The government has done a good job in Trinidad in terms of providing some level of stimulus for the private sector, for workers who have been displaced, for the vulnerable in society. But just like the US, who's just passed a $2 trillion stimulus package, if this is protracted for any length of time, you're going to have to go back and dip into savings, or you may actually have to go back and borrow to be able to fund just carrying your population and your private sector for this period of time. So, I mean, these are all points that are very, very valid, that requires some level of urgency. And I think it requires, as you say, Neil, Caribbean leaders to come together and really look at how us as Caribbean people can pool our resources. And we do have resources, pool our talents, pool our ideas, our networks, to be able to ensure that the livelihood of our people is protected, and we mitigate the risk and the impact on our populations. Because right now it's about buying power. Right now it's about who has the US and the Forex to afford to buy the food, and who can afford the goods will now buy that for their population. 1.4 million in Trinidad and 600,000 in Barbados. you're not very attractive when you face one of those big suppliers. So it really requires a different type of leadership. And I think tonight I like the conversation because what it is doing, it's challenging the status quo, right? And not necessarily going with the flow of how things have been going. And I think there needs to be some critical and urgent conversation among the leaders.
Sure. Ian, and thanks for that contribution. In fact, let me just share with you my own experience. I've been, I work the phones every single day on this supply chain. And let me put that into perspective. I'm very fortunate to be chairing a global organization called the Global Alliance for Surgery, Obstetrics, Trauma and Anesthesia Care. We have 92 members in our alliance all over the world. We're headquartered in Chicago and in Geneva, Switzerland. And being on the phone, understanding the supply chain, let me tell you what the reality is, because it's a question I'm going to pose to Frank as a medical doctor and as a former government official. Before COVID, a mask was 8 cents US. Today, a mask fetches up to $7 in New York, according to Governor Cuomo. Understand what I'm saying? 8 cents on the wholesale market from China, one now. That up to one of the biggest producers of, and by the way, you are absolutely right. I was aware of a shipment that went to Europe with 120 million masks. There's no way and the same effort for a supplier to send 120,000 masks to the Caribbean is the same effort for that supplier to send 120 million to Europe. So where would the supply go to in terms of our supply chain? One of the biggest manufacturers of ventilators in the world comes from Brazil. Brazil immediately put a shut on the export of ventilators. And if I'm to quote Governor Cuomo, ventilators are the equivalent of missiles in World War II. And Zach started by saying this is a war. So the weapon of choice in COVID-19 is a ventilator. That's how you defend your population, with ventilators. And there's none.
That's deep.
It's a very serious issue. The weapon of choice in COVID-19 war is a ventilator, and there is a global shortage. The US is now trying to repurpose some manufacturers to produce them, GE and others. Frank, there are two issues I want to touch on with you as a medical doctor and as a former government official. My biggest concern in COVID-19, and several of our colleagues touched on it, is the issue of food security. The raw figures are, in Latin America and the Caribbean, 10 million children depend every single day on school feeding. Schools are shut down, that's out the door. Certain governments are putting things in place to feed them. The Caribbean region and some parts of Central America collectively import 80% of their food, if I'm to include indirect input into food processing. Ian touched on that point. Do you see Guyana? We have heard the argument in the past from CARICOM that Guyana could be juxtaposed to become the food basket of the region. Is this the occasion that we could pull that trigger to create a sense of food security for the region? And then also I want you to touch on the whole issue of supply chain and how that may affect the well-being of Caribbean citizens, coming from the medical field and being a former government official.
Well, thank you again, Neil. I think those are two very important areas that you raise. The thing with food security, of course, we have capacity to produce food. Our capacity has always been that we don't export it in a timely manner, or those chains are not properly established to export it. And so maybe we'll need to do some work there to add value and also to make sure that we have the logistic chain to export. So that's something that perhaps we can work on. But definitely we have a vibrant agricultural sector, and we can use that to scale up and produce the types of food that is needed. So that's one. I don't see a difficulty with that. The second thing, though, and I like what Ian was talking about earlier in terms of pool procurement. I think that's absolutely essential because by ourselves, our orders might be too small, and therefore we might have more difficulty accessing some of the supplies that we urgently need. And therefore there is that urgency to perhaps come up with a mechanism where we can pool resources to secure personal protection equipment. I think that's an absolute necessity. Many places are now talking about not having enough. We certainly in Guyana, we don't have enough. And therefore, if we can have a regional initiative that can develop that mechanism, or if one of the private sector companies can take the lead on this and be able to start supplying these things, I think that would make a huge difference in this fight with COVID. When we talk about supply chains as well, one of the things that we have to bear in mind, where are we getting our pharmaceuticals from? And a lot of the pharmaceuticals, countries like India and Brazil and so forth, those countries now are shutting down the export of pharmaceuticals. So we are going to see down the road, maybe whether it's a month from now, 2 months from now, we are going to have grave difficulty sourcing pharmaceutical products. And that is something I don't think people have wrapped their minds around as yet, because we still have, our bonds and so forth. But down the road, we got to anticipate that there are going to be some difficulties.
Absolutely. And last time you and I were on, Frank, we had touched on the issue of very briefly on testing. I know we touched on it tonight. I think for the sake of the viewers, it'll be very helpful if you take a minute and explain the difference between, as a medical doctor, the tests that are being used now by most governments, PCR, versus testing, and what that may mean for a screening mechanism for the population. And then what I do after that, you answer that question. I would love to get some questions online through Facebook Live. You guys, please ask as much as you can. And then we could unmute our mics and just have an open dialogue with the social impact of this disease. Thank you, Frank.
So the way that you're testing right now around the world is that we are looking for the antigen, which is the virus particle, right? And that is being done by a test called PCR. So we are actually looking for that viral particle. Now, in a lot of, we've had the experience with the AIDS pandemic. And so we were able to develop tests that can use antibodies instead of the antigen. And those are called rapid tests. Now, for COVID-19, a number of companies have already gone and they've started to develop rapid tests where you can get those results maybe within 45 minutes or so. And that would save quite a lot of time. Now, when you're testing someone, you will have to do two types of tests. You will have to do one, which is a screening test, and the second one to confirm that what you have screened with, this person actually have this disease. But in the case where we are into this COVID fight, both of those tests, countries have been using a protocol where both of them are using PCR, right? Now, what we can do, once rapid test becomes available, we can use a rapid test as the screening test and then confirm it with the PCR. And that's going to make a lot more sense because we can use the rapid test, they're cheaper, we can screen a lot more people, and then we go to the other one. But you see, the WHO's recommend a certain protocol, and most countries are following that. But if you are in a war, you probably would have to take different set of measures. And while the WHO might not have been able to recommend currently a rapid test for the use, countries, there's nothing stopping countries to have their technical experts evaluate these things, or as a Caribbean region, we should bring our experts together to evaluate which of these rapid tests that are currently on the market that can be used and set up our own regional protocol. And so we can recommend that to the countries in the region. There's no reason why we can't do it as a region. We have all the experts. various countries, we can use their expertise to advise us on things like this, and we can devise our own protocols to ensure that we can create increased access to testing, because this is so important.
Sure.
This is the ways how we're going to know the magnitude of the epidemic, right? And once we know that magnitude, we can then be able to take the steps to control it.
Thanks, Frank. And let me just jump to one quick question, and then I will jump to Zach to touch on the issue of transportation. A question came in online that's asking, what is the regional response of CARICOM? And what is Haiti particularly vulnerable? Let me I'll answer that question for you by suggesting every single country in our hemisphere is particularly vulnerable, not just Haiti. We are all in this together. All barriers are down. It's a level playing field in terms of vulnerability. And the second question, in terms of CARICOM's response, my response to that is, regionally, our regional bodies are divided along functional lines. So CARICOM's health arm is an organization called the CARFA. CARFA is a sub-regional body that's part of PAHO, the Pan American Health Organization, which is the Western Hemispheric arm of the WHO, the World Health Organization. So globally, it's the World Health Organization. Western Hemispherically, it's the Pan American Health Organization. And sub-regionally for CARICOM, it's CARFA. So any response to COVID-19 does not come from the secretariat per se of CARICOM, which is more political and a bit more economic in orientation, but it comes from CARFA, who's responsible for public health. Zach, you wanted to make a point on transportation.
Yeah, so we have to be very innovative in a time like this, right? I have the pleasure of serving on the board of Caribbean Airlines. I'm appointed by the Minister of Finance in Jamaica. The airline is owned by two governments, Trinidad and Tobago, which is one government, and Jamaica, which is the other government. We've been taking a look at the airline and what is it that we can do to be helpful, etc. So all airlines internationally are vulnerable and are, have a finite timeline as to how long they can continue to stay viable if they have no passengers. One of the things that I'd like to propose, and I discussed it with the chairman of Caribbean Airlines, and I'm also discussing it with some of the people here locally in Jamaica, is we're talking about food. The issue is twofold. One is the production of food. The second is going to be the distribution of food. Okay? So if it is that your ports are closed and the planes are grounded and nothing is flying, how are you going to get food from one country to the next country? Right? So we have looked at, could we potentially repurpose our passenger planes into being partial cargo planes? St. Kitts apparently don't eat breadfruit. Right? It ends up washing away and floating away in the sea. Breadfruit is like a regular staple in Jamaica. Right? We're talking about the potential shortage of flour. You can make breadfruit flour. So is there an opportunity to get breadfruit where there's excess, move it to a location where you can process it and make breadfruit flour, and then distribute it across the other islands so that people have a good staple product to be eating, right? Right now we have the situation in Jamaica where farmers have watermelons and certain other fruits and perishable items that don't last very long that are about to start, they're going to have to dump them. Could we put this food and put it on a plane and carry it to another country where they may not have a lot of natural fruits or vegetables, for argument's sake? Sure. Even the moving of medication around the region. If you're no longer able to import certain medication from India or wherever else, do we have locally manufactured medication that could be moved around the region. So that whole concept of how can the region now come together and really look at the problem with a new lens, right? Because you can't solve you can't solve a new problem with old thinking, right? It requires new thinking. So you have to strip away and tear down all of those political barriers, all the pride barriers that would exist. You know, which prime minister you don't like and you don't want to work with them because of whatever reason. All of those things need to be stripped away now so that we can look at our own region, because we have no control over when the US opens back up its borders to allow us to get in or out, right? But we could make a decision regionally in terms of what goods we can put on planes and fly around to each other. Now would be the
Why not, Zach? Why not both? A viewer is asking, what about boats?
Yeah, boats too.
Each other.
Boats they just take longer, right? So absolutely, boats too, right? But now would be a time, for example, and I'm speaking now, you know, kind of, I guess, off the record, if that is even possible, right? But now would be a time to look at LIAT and Caribbean Airlines.
Absolutely.
Right? We have this regional, political, you know, sentimental thing going on between the two airlines, right? The region really needs one unified airline. But now would be the time to say, how can we use the smaller planes and the jets to start to move, you know, healthcare workers or critical service workers or, you know, hospital equipment or medication or food around the region so that we can be a little bit more protected by ourselves and not be so dependent on external help, because external help is not coming anytime soon. All the other countries are screwed, so they are not worried about how they're going to solve their own problems. The least of their problems now is the Caribbean. We have to fend for ourselves.
Zach, I totally agree with you. And I think it comes back to the point, and again, I said this on several programs I've been participating in. My biggest concern here is food security. And food security to me means food availability, food utilization, food sustainability, our ability to become self-sufficient,
distribution,
food access. It's one thing producing it. It's another thing people being able to access it. Ian, I will come to you in 1 minute. A viewer asked our opinion on the use of telemedicine, telehealth services. I think that's a very good point. In fact, I own a telehealth company here in the United States, and we have been focusing very, very much on how do we use telehealth services, our doctors network, our very robust technology to help unclutter the healthcare system. And we are focusing now in the Caribbean to instead of people going physically into a doctor's office, how do we use our very high cell phone penetration rates? Trinidad and Tobago has a cell phone penetration rate of 140%. And a great deal of that cell phone penetration rate is smartphone technology. Why can't we marry technology with a reliable doctor's network and provide the service via telehealth services with some minute amendments to the law? So those things, I think, you know, after September the 11th, and Ian, you can comment on this, because that's the question I'm going to ask you. After September the 11th, life changed for all of us in one fundamental way. And it still affects us today, and that is TSA. TSA was not around before. So how we behave in airports, how we move through airports has changed forever. I believe, and I would love to hear your opinion, and please correct me or discard my opinion. I think after COVID-19, tele will be the new opportunity. Telework, teleschool, telehealth. People will no longer ask, do I really need to have this meeting in person? The question would be, can I do it online? I enjoy talking to you in the comfort of my basement with a t-shirt on, rather than putting a suit and tie on to come and jump in a cab or jump in an Uber or jump in my car to come and see you with an hour in traffic. What are your thoughts? What would be the social changes, in your opinion, post-COVID-19?
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the biggest impacts post COVID-19. We're going to see the way we live, the way we work, the way we play, that's going to change. It's never going to be the same. And you can already see those changes taking effect in other countries. I mean, one of the things that came out of China's position with COVID-19, and we don't think about it, but it's the reality. China had to mop up huge amount of cash because cash was proving to be a transmitter of the virus. And so they had to take every single note out of circulation. And they had two options. They either had to disinfect, sanitize, which was going to cost them a whole lot of money, or they had to actually destroy and put new cash back into the system. What happened during that period of time? We saw that cash transactions took a backseat, and the population were now dealing with strictly online purchases, digital payments. And that's the trend we are seeing in every single society that has been impacted by this COVID virus.
Yeah.
So safe to say that the US has just passed a $2 trillion stimulus plan. And one of the positions put forward by the Democratic Party is that stimulus plan, the payments to the citizenry, must be done using a digital wallet. Now, that is going to have that's a game changer. And that's a game changer for all of those who are hedging on Bitcoin and other types of cryptocurrencies, because it means now that the US government would have developed a digital currency that is by far the highest value in terms of capitalization. So with that digital currency, it means therefore that if John Smith gets $2,000, the government can actually take its taxes at the minute he purchases or he or she purchases. The government can subtract their taxes immediately. So there's no filing of sales tax. There is no submission by the corporations. They have changed the entire game by saying, okay, I'm going to take my tax up front, and you can now purchase your milk, you can purchase your beans, you can purchase your rice. And here's the other thing about it. The government now has immediate data to show what you purchase, where you purchase, which organization you purchase from, and they can even drill down to the SKU perhaps with regards to where did that goods originate. In other words, immediately they can start tracking and reporting in the House and the Senate that the stimulus plan is working, because we are seeing citizens buying goods and they're buying milk. They've spent $2 billion in milk, and of the $2 billion in milk, the $2 billion was from farmers that came from these states, and therefore the economy is getting the impact that we needed, and we are seeing the trickle-down effect, and we are seeing. So when you think about COVID-19 and how it's changing our lives already, there are going to be some huge impacts. I mean, one of the other things that we're seeing right now is that.
Are you saying Uncle Sam is watching?
Well, this is not just Uncle Sam watching. This is Uncle Sam with you wherever you go. This is different. Uncle Sam watching, Uncle Sam knowing, Uncle Sam touching, Uncle Sam blocking what you can buy. So you're familiar with some goods. People who are on food cards in the United States, they are only allowed to buy from a selected amount of products. And this is one of the product problems right now in the US, in that with the panic buying, a lot of folks who are on social assistance program, they don't have food. They can't find food because people are going into the groceries and they're buying up all the foods that are within their category. And so when they go to the grocery, the food that are listed on the category for social persons who need social assistance, those foods are finishing because they're usually the cheaper product. They're usually a lower price, and therefore they're having a huge problem right now. So this stimulus plan is going to change most of what we know in terms of purchasing and buying and retail. The other area that is being impacted tremendously with the remote working is that employers are going to soon find out, as some of them are already finding out, that employees at home, for most part, tend to be much more productive. And therefore, we're going to see an impact in the real estate market where many of these corporations are going to say, well, we no longer need the 10 stories in the 7 to 8-story building, and therefore we're going to be scaling down to, cutting out staff coming into the office because they've reported that they don't have to commute, they don't have 1 hour, they don't have 2 hours commute time. We don't have to pay lunches for them. We don't have to pay free meals, free gym. So we're already seeing where even Google is saying, well, look, most of our workers, when they come to Google Campus, they are actually getting free meals, they have free gymming, they have free laundry services, and therefore some of these amenities are going to go away. So those are just two. There are quite a bit of other areas that are going to have huge impact for us. Education is certainly one of the areas. I know, for instance, in the Caribbean, there is already a team that is looking at how do we move the CSEC and the CAPE online. Therefore, if we should have something like this happening in the future, hurricane or some natural disaster, therefore it doesn't disrupt the learning of the students. So education is another area that we will see. This will be a game changer. So I think one of the good things, we talk about COVID, but there's some positive things coming out of COVID, Neil, and I think we have to, we have to look at it and see that there is some good coming out of this. I think this has allowed, in my neighborhood, certainly, I'm at home at 4 p.m. and I'm walking the streets and I'm seeing a lot of kids with their parents riding their bikes and their parents are with them, the little kids. And on a normal day, you don't see this, right? Because why? Parents are both in the office, mother and father running the rat race, and they have to get into the city very early and they come back home late at night, and you don't ever see the family together. And I think this little timeout that we have with COVID-19 really grounds us back into what is important. At the end of the day, what is important? Family is important. And we sort of lost that. We lost that over the decades, thinking that the corporate, ladder, you need to climb it, you need to be successful, you need to get that big position. So I'm seeing a lot of good in that. I'm seeing nature also. We've seen the cases of the canals in Venice where the dolphins are coming back in. China, the pollution is down. So certainly, COVID has said, hey, you guys need to stop. And when you stop, let's see how nature is going to fix itself. Let's see how nature is going to remedy itself. So there is some good coming out of it as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. I totally concur with you. In fact, it really covered so far. I hate to say this, it's an irresponsible, potentially irresponsible statement, but COVID has proven to be so far the great equalizer. Meaning, money doesn't matter at this point. Politics doesn't matter at this point. It's your ability to follow the rules and stay with friends and loved ones in your home. Somebody asked a question on social media whether we should be engaged in Cuba because they seem to have some semblance of a solution to this crisis. Right now, in my mind, there is no greater opportunity for world governments not to come together to deal with this crisis. It's a global pandemic, and we need all the resources and brain power we can, intellectual horsepower, especially in the healthcare arena, to solve this crisis. And I absolutely feel any country, forget politics and policy, any country that can offer a solution to this crisis should be embraced and engaged. That's my own view. Frank, we have a few more minutes. I would like to touch on the issue of this whole idea of social impact. We had some good examples on it, but I feel coming out of this advice as a leader, what can we do? I see a lot more people being political, yes, but that goes through its normal cycle. There's a cyclicity in a pandemic, the psychology of a pandemic, from anxiety to survival mode. People behave in certain ways. Pandemic progresses, and the more you're self-isolated, the more you're quarantined, the more you tend to go into survival mode. And that means one of two ways. You stay indoors and you follow the rules, or you begin to distrust leadership and rebel against it. We hope society does not. But I think there's a lot we can do from a community service standpoint, Frank, using technology to assist our friends and family and neighbors. Like my wife is curating, and she's a professional ballerina. She's curating some work to teach in schools, for example. So I see, shout out to my friend in Trinidad, Roger Saloom. He's a drummer. He comes on Facebook and is basically teaching us how to play the drums. This sort of community outreach, Frank, how else can we have more of this to be each other's keeper in this time of crisis?
Well, I think all of us, we wanted to get our countries safely through this pandemic, and there are some simple rules that we are trying to get people to follow. As Zach said when he made his opening statements, I think people are still too relaxed about this whole pandemic. People don't believe it's going to happen, and somehow we need to get that information over to them. So I think we still need to have um, public education being, out there trying to educate people about this pandemic, what it means, how we can change the dynamics of this whole thing. I think that's very important. And then because we're changing our lifestyle, those persons who are going to adhere to the recommendations and stay in, people are not accustomed to stay at home for such long periods of time. And maybe there's need for a service that should come up to start advising people about what are the kinds of things that you should do when you are in lockdown or when you're staying at home for extended periods of time. There's need for people in psychology who can probably help with those types of advices. I haven't seen much of that happening. And again, as a region, these are things that we can pool our resources, because if we don't have enough psychiatrists and psychologists in one country, perhaps if we can pool the resources and use the internet and platforms like this to disseminate information to families who are staying at home, that would certainly help. So there are different methodologies that we can use. I like when Ian was talking about telehealth as well. One of the things that I think in a post-COVID world, there are lots of transformation that is going to happen. And I read an article that says things that you couldn't get done for many, many decades. In a crisis, it would happen in minutes or hours because people get it and they would push and make sure that it happened. Now, one of the things that we have been resistant to is moving towards systems that provide telehealth, because we like that in-person consultation. But because of the nature of what we are confronting, we need to shift to that. So it's going to be a good thing for our patients to reschedule and have them come for a telehealth consult rather than coming in person. But most countries do not have those platforms. And here is an opportunity for us to build them. The other thing is that at a regional level, we might have a lot of expertise in terms of infectious diseases. And here is an opportunity of using telemedicine to offer guidance to doctors in other parts of the region. So this can be used to help consulting difficult cases and so forth. So there are lots of application that we can get out of this, but we need to start thinking about how we put these things together and maybe to have some leadership on it, because while we talk about it, to get it done, we need to have like-minded individuals put it together and make it happen. And I think that's very important.
Sure. Frank, I will make a public promise to you. I own a telehealth company. I own a telehealth platform. I'm going to bring it to you in Guyana. I would love to see it because I feel we have to marry technology and look after the well-being of our citizens. Gentlemen, we have 1 minute, 15 seconds each. Closing comments. Zach, starting with you, then Ian, then Frank, and then I will end the program.
Well, the closing comments we put in two parts. I would like to publicly say here that I'm very interested in investing in your telehealth business. And I'll talk to you some more about what that would look like. We certainly need it here in Jamaica also. And I think that that's a tremendous opportunity.
Thank you. I think Zach is somewhat frozen. Am I correct? Ian, if we get Zach back, we will
Yeah,
put him. Ian, proceed.
yeah. Zach froze just as he was about to tell you what he was willing to pay.
Zach, are you back on?
I think
Ian, go ahead. We'll go
Yeah,
ahead.
so no, I think this discussion has been really a good discussion. I think we need more of these types of dialogue. How do we get it to be at the forefront so that we have more people within the population and even the leadership thinking along these lines and understanding that we really have to find new ways of working together and working together as a people. We have to forge together as a people, as one Caribbean people. I think that is what is going to differentiate and really allow us to come out of this crisis, world crisis, with the Caribbean as an example for the world to follow. How are we self-sufficient? How are we independent? How can we protect our fragile economies and move it away from the tourism-based economies and really get our creativity of our young people? We need to get the young people to work. And that is going to take some creativity by the leadership in terms of providing the right environment and the right stimulus and the right direction and support for some time. Certainly, the large countries are going to be looking after themselves, at least for the next couple of years. And I think this is really our time to chart a new course for our people, our Caribbean people. That's what I would like to share.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ian. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. Zach, can we have the opening statement of your closing statement, please?
No, just saying that I really am interested in working with you guys. We have a strong interest at SSL in investing in and looking at telemedicine and telehealth. I would definitely love to collaborate more with Frank and with Ian. There are a lot of great points that were made. And these are how things start, right? So Neil and I go back some time now. He just called me up and said, listen, we're doing this thing. Globespan 24x7 has thousands of viewers. We'd love for you to come on. Jumped on, met these two brilliant gentlemen. And I think in this discussion alone, I've learned so much. And I think that there are definitely some takeaways that we could not just talk about, but actually act on in the service of our people and in the service of our countries.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Zach. Dr. Anthony, what is yours?
Well, like everybody said, I think it was an excellent conversation, but this can be the beginning of many more things to come. I want to thank you, Neil, for facilitating this, and Nohar, who has lent us his platform. I think we need more conversations like this. You know, it shows that the Caribbean, we have the ideas. We need to put them into action and to put them in the service of people. So once you can get the conversation going, I'm sure we can start getting some concrete actions out of it that would benefit people. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And again, thanks for mentioning Nohar Singh's name. Nohar, thank you for lending us the platform. To all the listeners and viewers on live social media, thank you for joining. Thank you for the conversations. And I saw people from Toronto, London, New York, throughout the diaspora. Thank you for joining us. And please, I think you guys should jump on this platform, Globespan TV 24/7. Let's keep this as a community, an open channel to keep this dialogue going. There are so many facets of this COVID-19 that needs to be discussed. I am particularly concerned about a few issues that will rear its head in the next coming months. One of them is the psychology of self-isolation. I think that's something we need to talk about so we understand why our mindset is changing as we are quarantined at home. Why are we feeling this way? How do we be our brother's keeper? And I also plead to all of you online particularly. There's a lot of talent out there. I learned literally how to play a drum by looking at somebody online. somebody from Trinidad and Tobago. I saw people teaching folks how to cook online. It's a way of engaging your community. Not that I can cook, I think I can, but I would love to learn some more skills. So the idea is you're home, you have time, use it productively, set a schedule. Let's use up this platform and the others to share in each other's wisdom and experience. You know, there comes a time, ladies and gentlemen, when humanity really has to shift to a new level of consciousness, a higher moral ground. And I really feel that time is today. That time is now. I wish all of you a safe rest of night, a safe weekend. Let us look to be each, a brother's keeper. And please join us again for future programming. Have a wonderful weekend all. Thank you very much.